apart from the questions of the managing of cyclical dynamics over the next several years, what is striking is that you can say it in two different ways. One way to say it is that the expectation is that the Fed funds rate will peak in this cycle below 2%, despite everything that I said. Another way to say it is that the five-year forward real interest rate is now, after a substantial hike this week, about negative 20 basis points. So to predict that in the presence of a debt to GDP ratio way up from where it was 5 years ago, and at the level that the neutral real interest rate, even assuming that somehow interest rates never have to get above the neutral real interest rate, is significantly negative, is to predict that the secular stagnation type mechanisms, the shortfall of investment, excess of saving mechanisms, are operating on steroids substantially more strongly than I expected they were operating before the pandemic. There are fundamentally two possibilities for understand. You're muted, Jan, but I'm coming to a conclusion. There are fundamentally two possibilities for understanding this. One is that markets are wrong and that we will see significant increases in interest rates over the next interval. And it would be my expectation, as the reality of what I've said about inflation and as the reality of the need for balancing supply and demand become clear, that interest rates will rise substantially over the next year and a half. The other possibility is that the secular stagnation type mechanisms, that the mechanisms that transform the central macroeconomic problem from being the absorption of savings in an effective way, the problem that preoccupied Keynes, will become, for some substantial interval, the dominant problem, which will lead to a need for very different thinking about fiscal policy, but much more generally, a broad range of structural policies directed at supporting aggregate demand, including by enabling social insurance to reduce the need for precautionary and life cycle savings, and promoting, often done in the private sector, investments like those in pandemic prevention and climate change that have high social returns relative to their private returns. Except on panels, matters are rarely monocausal. And so my suspicion is that both are true, that interest rates will rise by more than is priced into the forward curve, and that there will be a need past this episode for thinking about approaches to the savings absorption challenge.